forces deployed 11 warships and 25,000 Marines for intercepts Taiwan. For many years, Taiwanese defense planners assumed that if and when China invades the island democracy, the main Chinese force would sail across the 100-mile Taiwan Strait and assault the beaches of southwestern Taiwan. But that thinking is changing as the People's Liberation Army grows more powerful. World War III. China sparked all-out conflict to war with US in South China Sea. The PLA attacked Taiwan along multiple axes. The more different directions the Chinese come from, the harder it would be for the Taiwanese forces to organize an effective defense. The strained relations between the US and China have stoked fears of a possible all-out conflict or world war. With the two countries at odds over several issues, especially regarding the South China Sea, both were reportedly moments away from sparking a military conflict in the waters. A report from the Chinese Central Television outlet revealed one clash that occurred in May that almost led to an all-out conflict or world war between the two countries. A squadron of U-30 fighter jets, led by ace pilot Lu Geng, intercepted a foreign military aircraft that was approaching their airspace. According to the radio communications from the report, the pilot warned the foreign pilots in both English and Mandarin to leave their airspace. When the foreign aircraft did not turn back, Lu and his unit started to simulate attack maneuvers in an attempt to intimidate the pilots.
U.S. military sends 70,000 troops with secretive plans to encircle China in the South China Sea.
Pilots ultimately decided to turn back, de-escalating the situation. Speaking with the outlet later on, Lu said he would not have hesitated to open fire on the planes if the situation called for it. While the report did not specify the nationality of the foreign pilots, experts believe that the pilots were most likely American. To note, the monitoring carried out by the South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative, the U.S. Air Force deployed around 35 spy planes to the region in May. Stations or public figures who say otherwise. Taiwan, however, has maintained its independence and has strongly been defying China. To strengthen Taiwan's defense, international presence, and economy including its vital semiconductor industry, against China.
Joe Biden is moving ahead with a terrifying plan to encircle China by planting U.S. troops on islands around the mainland country, amid growing fears of military conflict. There are mounting concerns that war could break out between the U.S. and China. Former UK MP George Galloway warned that an accidental military conflict could erupt as the U.S. floods the region with its soldiers. This comes amid a high-level Pentagon plan to send U.S. troops to the Pacific to be in close quarters with China. The U.S. is set to spend more than $5 billion alone on the Pacific Defense Initiative in 2022 as they counter the threat of China. RT's Rick Sanchez said, "We are learning that top military officials are indicating to Congress that what they really need to do is move U.S. military forces, actual troops, to the islands around the South China Sea, to be in close quarters with China."
The United States will use its global clout and alliances to strengthen Taiwan's defense, international presence, and economy, including its vital semiconductor industry, against China, U.S. administration officials told Congress on Thursday. Washington will also make clear that Taipei must avoid any provocative action that would compel Beijing to respond, even as it pressures Taiwan to increase its military spending, invest in more mobile coastal cruise missile systems, and strengthen its military reserves, they said.
U.S. Navy dismisses claim China drove away warship from disputed Paracel Islands.
Quite like the Chinese Communist Party. There was mass singing, vigorous flag waving, and a show of military might for its 100th anniversary. But the festivities really centered on one man, Xi Jinping, the president of China and, more importantly, the General Secretary of the Communist Party. He offered platitudes and threats.
谁妄想这样干，必将在14多亿中国人民用血肉铸成的钢铁长城面前碰得 头破血流。
That line got the biggest cheer of the day. The party knows the benefit of throwing the red meat of nationalism to the crowd. And he gave yet another sign of where a more assertive China might be looking.
坚决粉碎任何台独图谋。
That would be a spiraling conflict. The UK is dispatching its new aircraft carrier to the waters around Taiwan, and the US and Japan are reportedly conducting war games over the defense of the island. After an hour's speech, heavy on the ideology, all that was left was to release the pigeons, and then the balloons.
Over recent decades, the party become less visible as China embraced capitalism, got very rich and became a bit less Marxist. But it was on full display here today, thanks to one man mainly who gave the speech, President Xi Jinping. He has reasserted party authority, extending it into private and public life. And that's born from the belief that really only the party can save China and only Xi Jinping can save the party.
The ceremony was held in Tiananmen Square, which of course holds a darker history, of the student protesters who assembled here in 1989 and were later gunned down by their fellow citizens in the army. Ma Jian was on the square more than 30 years ago. His books are banned in China and he lives in exile in London.
中国共产党已经绑架了中国人民。如果我们再不觉醒，看到今天的画面的话，也许我们的孩子就在今天的那个画面里面。 这个世界的人民都将成为他绑架的对象。今天让我们看到的，应该让西方人觉醒。
The fact is that the Chinese Communist Party has never been more secure, never been more in control, never had more resources at its disposal. What it does with all that extends beyond the Chinese people it rules over and affects the whole world. Tom Shesher, Sky News, Beijing.
On Wednesday, the U.S. Air Force and Navy responded in their own way, sortying no fewer than 4 surveillance planes into the airspace around Taiwan. The Chinese mission was an unveiled threat, a reminder that it's the main aim of China's foreign policy to unify the mainland and Taiwan, potentially by invading the island democracy and undoubtedly killing tens of thousands of people. The American mission, combined with ongoing deployments by U.S. Navy aircraft carriers, corvettes and submarines, is a reminder that it's still U.S. policy to defend Taiwan from its repressive authoritarian neighbor. China's aerial operation on Tuesday was impressive in scale and composition. 2 KJ-500 radar early warning plane angled southeast from the edge of Guangdong province and held station south of Taiwan while 26 fighters, bombers and sub-hunting planes mounted their own sorties. 16 J-11 and J-16 fighters formed a barrier between Taiwan and the radar planes as a formation including 4 H-6 bombers, a Y-8 sub-hunter and 4 J-16s looped around southern Taiwan, then turned north to skirt the country's east coast. If that maneuver sounds familiar, it's because it's central to China's war plans. Both the Chinese Navy and the Chinese Air Force aim to break through Taiwanese, American and Japanese defenses in order to surround Taiwan and threaten the country from the east, where its defenses might be lighter than in the west. There are 2 options for breaking through. 1. Punch through Japan's chain of small island outposts that stretches from Yonaguni Island, 100 miles west of Taiwan, through Miyakojima north to Okinawa. The Miyako Strait is the Chinese Navy's main portal to the Philippine Sea. Back in April, The Chinese carrier Liaoning passed through that strait while sailing from and back to its base in Qingdao, on China's northeast coast. The Japanese armed forces are fortifying the islands around the Miyako Strait and buying F-35B jump jets to fly from them, all in a bid to block Chinese forces from passing through during wartime. The other option for breaking out is the one the 28 Chinese planes practiced on Tuesday. Fly around southern Taiwan through the Bashi Strait, southeast of the island, into the Philippine Sea east of Taiwan. The northern breakout option is risky. The southern option might be even riskier. Taiwan is building up a force of more than 200 new and upgraded F-16 fighters. One of their main missions, in wartime, would be to patrol the Bashi Strait. One analyst even urged Taipei to buy aerial tankers to help the F-16s to spend more time over that choke point. Which is why, when the H-6 bombers passed over the strait on Tuesday, fighters accompanied them. During a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the Chinese Air Force would have to fight its way through the Bashi Strait. It undoubtedly would be a bloody affair, especially considering the likely presence of significant American forces in the region during any Chinese attack. It would take Beijing weeks, if not months, to mobilize the troops and ships it would need in order for an invasion to have any chance of succeeding. The U.S. Air Force sortied an E-3 radar early warning plane and an RC-135 electronic eavesdropping plane to the East China Sea north of Taiwan. A U.S. Navy MQ-4 drone joined them. Meanwhile, a second RC-135 flew over the South China Sea south of Taiwan. It's apparent the surveillance planes were operating out of either Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa or Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. Between them, these aircraft alone could scan millions of square miles of ocean with their radars while also listening for electronic signals from Chinese forces. The surveillance planes are the eyes and ears of a powerful American force. Right now in the Western Pacific there are two U.S. Navy battle groups, one each centered on the carrier USS Ronald Reagan and the assault ship USS America, as well as two solo littoral combat ships and 4 U.S. Air Force B-52 bombers. The Navy's secretive commando submarine USS Jimmy Carter has been underway in the Pacific, too. If war seemed imminent, the U.S. Pacific Fleet surely would deploy at least one more carrier group, if not several more, to the waters around Taiwan. There are, it's worth remembering, 7 carrier and amphibious groups in the Pacific Fleet. As striking as the dueling Chinese and American air operations were on Tuesday and Wednesday, they represented just a tiny fraction of the military force that the world's biggest powers would bring to bear if the Pacific Cold War ever boiled over.